This ranch, um, is a lifelong dream that I never really thought would transpire. Um, a lot of hurdles. Everybody has hurdles in their lives, right?
Right.
I don't know if mine were bigger or smaller, but man, there were times when they just seemed impossible and huge to get over. Um, it's kind of funny. It seems like it took me a really long time to grow up. And I don't know what the point of that was. Maybe it was in preparation for having kids at a later age. I'll be turning 62 in about 30 days. And I have a 14-year-old son, so yeah, I started a little later than most. But yeah, I grew up on a ranch out in the country. We raised Charolais cattle back in the late 70s when artificial insemination was just taking off. So I was very fortunate as a kid to be able to be raised in that environment. By an extremely tough father. Um, and at the time, I thought it was abusive. But as time has gone by and I've become a dad and I've had to weather all these hardships, I've realized that my dad was just prepping me for the future.
Right.
He knew it wasn't going to get any easier, and he knew it wasn't going to get any better. Um, so I did a stint in the military out of school. I went to college after that, played football for a couple of years, came back to San Antonio in the late 80s when the SNL scandal was happening and the economy was crap. And, our construction company couldn't handle the addition of me. So I became a San Antonio fireman. I feel like I've had a gazillion careers. Um, I did that for 8 years. About 4 years in, my father approached me to come work for the company as a project manager. And I decided to take advantage of that. I mean, it was something that I'd always wanted to do.
Was it a business that you already had a pretty good knowledge of, or were you coming in pretty brand new to it?
Well, I grew up in the business as a kid. He started that company in 1974, so I was 11 years old. So my summers, especially once I could drive, were spent cleaning job sites and digging ditches and mopping floors and the very bottom of the.
But you started learning the operational part.
Yeah, I
of it.
started learning, just kind of getting into it. When I came on board in 90, let's see, that would have been probably 1996-ish. 95, 96, I came on board, maybe even 94. Started working in the office as a project manager. I had no clue what I was doing. And someone who's a dear friend to me today, Frank Casillas, was my father's vice president at the time. He and my dad had multiple conversations about how they were going to get me to overcome being a single 30-ish, kind of lazy guy to becoming, a valuable person at the company. So I went to work for my dad. He approached me. I went to work for him. And then fast forward 3 or 4 years later, and he was killed on his ranch about 30 miles from here, 30 miles from here, in La Pryor, Texas, between Batesville and La Pryor. Fell off the roof of his barn, was airlifted off the ranch to University in San Antonio.
He survived the fall initially?
He didn't, he survived the fall. His wife at the time called me on the phone at the office to get the sheriffs to come and an ambulance. He was in the middle of nowhere. The response time was 11 minutes, which I thought was faster than hell for out here.
Right.
And I ended up calling her back when she was kneeling over him, and he was he was telling her, I love you, tell my family I love them, this is it, I can't feel my arms, I can't feel my legs. He knew, he could tell that he was going down. And she had to hang up. They had called Air Life, and Air Life was landing, and they were putting him on Air Life. When I was sitting in the parking lot of a Wendy's restaurant, a block from University, just couldn't even gather my thoughts. They were all over the map. I had no clue what was coming. Right. The helicopter flew right over my head, landed on the deck at University. My sister was up there. My anxiety levels were too high to stand around up there on the flight deck. I just didn't really want to see that. And she called me crying and saying they were still doing CPR on him when they pulled him off of Air Life. But, I was in the fire department for 8 years. That was all for show. Yeah, it was all for show. It had been 2 hours since he had fallen. So they took him in, worked him over, called us all into a conference room, told us that he didn't make it, which I pretty much basically knew. They said that the doctor told us if he had had the accident in the parking lot of the hospital, he's not sure he could have saved him.
So it was bad.
Yeah, it was bad. Yeah. He fell, he landed on the tongue of a gooseneck trailer and broke a bunch of ribs, and they all did internal damage to his organs.
Right.
So, so then at that point, I took over the company. It was almost an overnight thing, and I grew the company probably by 3 or 4 times during that period. And then at some point I had to shut it down. It's funny, there's a reason that happened, and I don't really want to get into that. It was actually the failure of a subcontractor that started the cascade of events that caused the company to go under. So the day my dad passed away, we were leaving the hospital, and I had a big, tall, white diesel Excursion, kind of a gaudy thing. I love doing stuff to vehicles. Later, we'll pan over and take a look at my newest addition. But so we decided to go to my brother's house to kind of all gather together and just debrief and talk about, what the hell just happened. I mean, because you're talking about the patriarch of our family, just the driving force of everything all of us had done and did, and we knew our futures had changed in an instant that day, and we just wanted to all go sit around and talk about it. So I'm driving in my Excursion with my wife, and we pull up to a stoplight. And the minute we pull up to the stoplight, a street light flickers right next to me and dies, goes out, turns black. And at the exact same time that street light goes black, my Excursion dies. And it had never done that before. I'd owned it for a few years. It had never done that before. It never did it again after that. I probably owned that thing 5 or 6 years, and that was the only time it died. The street light died, my Excursion died, wouldn't turn over, wouldn't do anything. So, it didn't hit me then. And I call a wrecker. The wrecker driver shows up. He pulls up behind my Excursion. I tell him the story of what happened, and he goes, "Have you pushed the reset button?" "What are you talking about?" And he gets on the passenger floorboard, and he pulls the carpet back, and there's a hole. And he sticks a rod in there. He's like, "Try it now." Fired right up. I don't know what that meant. I don't know if that was my father trying to tell me. If he was telling me that eventually everything was going to crash, he was absolutely correct. Eventually everything crashed. I wasn't mature enough. I didn't have the business acumen to really move forward with that. I always say one of the things that I could have done, should have done, which is armchair quarterbacking, is I could have gone to Frank Casillas and hired him back because in 1998, Frank Casillas left. My dad and I, no, he didn't retire. He and my dad kind of got sideways, and he left, and my dad approached me, and I was a San Antonio fireman, and he said, "Hey, look, Frank left. If you want to come in and run the company, I'll be happy to let you. I'm just telling you, you can't be a fireman and run this company. If you don't want to quit the fire department, no problem. I'll just hire somebody to do it. And you can continue to work here as a project manager." Well, the next day I drove downtown and signed 3 documents, and I was gone. And I left the fire department. It's funny. We all have this super high confidence when we're younger, and we think we know it, and we think we got it. And I can promise you, until you're 50 years old, you haven't known or gotten as much as you think you have.
So you'd resigned from the San Antonio fire department. It's hard for me to say fire department,
Well, I can tell you, as many meals that I have fed cops, you should be able to say it with a full tummy.
Absolutely, that's right. And my brother is a retired firefighter.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, my dad was. It's always fun poking at each other. So from there, you took over the company. 3 or 4 years, you double, tripled, really ran that business up to a very high level, and then everything came crashing down. Did it set you back to zero?
To zero. When I saw the ending coming, we were building schools. When the day came that I realized that we weren't going to make it, like I said, I had a subcontractor go broke on me. That was pretty much on every project I had, and I had inherited him, and but I'll tell you something else. I ran that company. There's no excuses. There's no blame. The buck stops here. There are a lot of quality control things that I could have done to keep that from happening. But I was just so excited about having that company and all the things that I wanted to do with it that I lost track of what actually makes you money, and that's everything that happens in the field. You can bid every bid. You can put all the profit on there you want. You can win every contract that you want. But if you can't execute, you don't have anything.
Right.
And not in desperation, but in a being excited about growing the company and getting a lot of projects. I hired some guys from some companies that I didn't know a lot about. I didn't know a lot about these guys. I knew they had worked at some really big companies, and their resumes were glowing. But that was on me. Me not being more careful with the subcontractor, that's on me. Like I said, the buck stopped here, it all falls on me. So yeah, when I realized it was going down, I had 2 bonding companies at the time because one of them alone couldn't handle our workload. So I had 2. So I called them both and told them what was happening, and was very forthcoming and said, "Hey, I'm not going to make it. And if you guys want to get out of this as unscathed as possible, we need to have a meeting." So we scheduled that meeting in my conference room, and a friend of mine that was in the bond business, I knew how the system worked, and I knew that I had signed a bunch of personal guarantees and that everything I owned was on the line. Well, I knew I was going to need a good attorney. So I called my buddy who worked for a bond company, and I asked him for the name of an attorney who the bond companies like to use to go after contractors. And he gave me the name of Tom Barber out of Houston, who eventually became a really good friend. And so I called Tom Barber, and I had a conversation with him, and he looked through his records, and he says, we don't have any cases with either one of those bond companies right now. He goes, so I can represent you. So fast forward to that meeting, and Tom Barber and I are sitting in my conference room when the two bond companies arrived with their entourage.
And they knew who he was.
They walked in the door, and the first one that saw him said, "Oh, Tom, I didn't realize that we had hired you for this case." And he goes, "Well, I'm not working for you. I'm working for him." And both of their faces just dropped. And I instantly knew that I had hired the right guy.
That's got to be a good feeling in a world of darkness.
And I wanted him there to negotiate. I mean, there was no doubt this was going to cost me money. There was no doubt that this was going to be a ding on my record moving forward. So both of those bond companies today, in fact, one of them bonds me again. And what they tell me is that, you know what? The reason we trust you is because instead of some other contractors who just lock the door and throw us the keys and go, good luck figuring that out.
Right.
You brought us in ahead of time before the crash actually happened and allowed us to work with you. And they did. They collected all my money for me, but they paid me for my overhead. They paid me for all my labor. And with the help of the two bond companies, we finished all $30 or $40 million worth of work over a period of a year. It took about a year. But we finished it together as a team. And they didn't come after me. They didn't take my personal assets. I sold the office where we were, the office and the land, and gave them that money. And they took about 15 or 20 cents on the dollar and walked away and didn't come after me. So, it was a plus, a real plus. And I know you want to get to the part where I started over because it's a interesting story.
It is.
Yeah.
But no rush. It's absolutely at your pace.
So yeah, I got to go broke, flat broke. Had a lot of vendors. I satisfied the bond company and we finished those jobs, and all those people got paid. Mm-hmm. But I had other projects that weren't bonded and different things going on. I had started a site work company called Benchmark Excavation, trying to roll from going broke over here to establishing a successful company over here. But the hole in the original company was so deep that there was no way this company could fill it. So I ended up just shutting them both down, and walking away. The aftermath of that was serious. I had to file a $5.5 million personal bankruptcy. I could have bankrupted T.M. Davis Construction and paid off who I owed personally on the personal guarantees that I'd signed. But my guilt level, especially after my father dying and knowing how much that company meant to him, I couldn't do it. I couldn't put the word bankrupt with his name because, I just wasn't going to do it. There's just no way in hell I was going to do that to my dad, even though he was already gone. So I took it personally and filed it personally. There's debtor meetings when you file a bankruptcy like that, where you and your attorney get to sit up at a table in front of anyone who wants to come who you owe money to and complain and basically just rip you a new one about why you didn't pay him and blah, 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 and where'd the money go? Just to see if they have any reason to, because they can file suits while you're in bankruptcy,
right,
saying that what you owe them shouldn't be discharged. But there's certain laws and rules that control that. None of them fit in it, but so many people came to question me and make me feel this big. We had to do it 2 days. So I was in there for 8 hours the first day and about 6 hours the second. while my guilt level just rose and rose and rose the whole time I was in there, and people just pounded me about the money I owed them.
Brutal.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a blast. So after that had been filed and I got everyone off of my back, I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. I had a lot of personal things: guns, jewelry, ATVs, UTVs, different trailers. You know, I had kind of pulled some stuff away from the company and parked it at a friend of mine's yard, thinking that I might be able to turn that crap into cash at some point to help until I could figure out what I wanted to do. And I must have done a pretty good job of it, because there was about a 6-month gap between the time that I shut everything down and the time that I was able to start over again. And my daughter was in the 3rd or 4th grade. Sterling, my second son, was in the first grade. Stratton, my third son, was 3 or 4 years old, and of course Shaden wasn't around yet. The point being, none of my kids knew we had a problem. Yeah, so I was able to buffer them from that whole issue. Now my wife, obviously, she knew
everything.
There was a problem, and and God love her, she stuck by me the whole time. Through the good and the bad, which is, she's to be commended for that. So anyway, I didn't know what to do. I figured, since we had always done our own site work in concrete, but moreover the site work, I had learned quite a bit about that function of our company, working for my dad and then running the company. And it's kind of funny, and this is to all you general contractors out there. If you look around, and in the construction industry in San Antonio, you realize that all the ranches are owned by site work contractors. I don't know many GCs. I'm sure there are a few. I don't know many GCs that have 2,000-acre ranches like this one. There's a lot of reasons for that. I had my own theories. Moving dirt, doing site work, is a kind of an unusual beast in the general contracting world. Because an electrician, when an electrician bids a job, his costs are pretty fixed. He has parts or material, and then he basically has labor, right? Well, the only way he can make more money and pick up more money off of his bid is if he does the labor faster, which sometimes isn't always good. Quick work sometimes isn't that great. Anyway, the point being that in the dirt world, in the site work world, if we need dirt or we're having to get rid of dirt, when we bid the job, let's say we put $100,000 in to get rid of the dirt. Well, more times than not, there's somebody within a 10-mile radius of you that wants that dirt. Sometimes they'll just come get it, and you pick up $100,000. There have been times when we've gotten them to pay us for it. So we get to keep our original 100 plus the money that we charge them to sell the dirt to them. So I recognized that early on and realized that there's a little pot of gold, if you will, inside of this dirt moving industry, where you can barter the dirt and other aspects of the business and actually do fairly well. So I was kind of concentrating on that, trying to figure out what to do, after the bankruptcy and all the BS. And I would get in my truck with my flip phone. That was probably a flip phone, right? Back in 2007-ish.
That was the year the iPhone was introduced.
It is. I probably didn't have an iPhone. I probably had a flip phone. So anyway, I would leave my house every day. I would drive. I lived in Fair Oaks, and then we moved to Spring Branch. But I would leave my house, and I would either drive 410 or I would drive 1604.
So you would just drive the
I
entire
just
loop.
drive the entire loop because I had so much anxiety about what I was going to do because I had no clue. And I have a wife and 3 kids to support. And I grew up, I will tell you this, I grew up really fast during that period, going through all that.
How old were you then?
I was 43 when I went broke. And I was 44. Basically, between 43 and 44 is when all this happened, and I had to file the bankruptcy, and all that crap happened. So I'm driving around. This is like after Christmas, January. I sold a bunch of stuff, jewelry, guns, like I said, stuff, to make sure that we could go through a reasonable Christmas. Like I said, my kids had no clue. And they thought everything was just still, like it always had been, which was one of my goals. So yeah, I would drive around 410. I would drive around 1604. Just going through my contact list, which was huge. And I called general contractors. I called all kinds of people, just trying to find out if there was anybody out there who would give me the opportunity, to do a site work project for them, with the intention of, I knew I had 2 or 3 operators that would come back to work for me, and I knew that I could rent equipment to do a job, and I was just confident that if I could find the opportunity, I could figure it out. So I'm driving down 281 one day, and I'm passing the corner of 281 and TPC Parkway, where the In-N-Out Burger sits now. And that was a big, giant, vacant 5 or 6 acres. A friend of mine owned that. His name is Jim Stoltz. He's a realtor out of Austin. And he at one time had gotten budget numbers from me to level that site, to build a hotel pad in the back, and some retail pads up front, which is eventually what happened to that site. So I called Jim and I said, hey, I know I gave you a budget number about a year ago to do your site, and I noticed your site is still sitting here. If you would like to do that still, I can give you a really good price. I explained to him what had happened and told him that I was kind of floundering around trying to figure out what to do. And told him what I wanted to do. And he goes, I don't have any takers yet, as far as, he didn't want to put any money into it until he had someone who either wanted to lease the pads or buy pieces of it. So he said, I'm really not in a position to do that right now. He said, but I know a guy who is a developer in the Dominion that is building a retirement community, and he wants to build a big office complex, and he still has a couple of units in the retirement community to build, and he tried to do his own site work last year with a guy, but the guy ended up not working out, and he goes, anyway, he's got 5 or 6 pieces of equipment sitting in the brush at the Dominion. Okay, give me his number. So it takes me a couple of weeks to get a hold of this guy. His name is Joel Pollock. And it takes me a couple of weeks to get a hold of him. But I finally do. And he invites me in to his office. And I walk into his office and I sit down and I tell him this story that I've just told you. And he looks at me and he goes, well, before we talk any further, let's go out and look at the equipment. I said, okay. So we get on a golf cart and we drive back into the brush behind this retirement community. And sure enough, there's 4 or 5 pieces of equipment sitting back there. A motor grader, a loader, a track loader, a water truck, and something else. And it was old, but it had been running in the last year. So I felt confident we could get it going. And we go back to his office, and I said, okay. I said, I don't have any money, but I can make you payments. So he goes, I'll tell you what, let's do this. You can use this equipment for free for a year. But at the end of the year, I want $75,000 for it, which was pretty cheap. And I said, okay, great. I mean, I was elated. You know, I wasn't going to have to rent that. I wouldn't have to come out. Yeah, I was elated. I just had to find a project. And he goes, by the way, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be starting this big office complex. And he says, can you give me a bid on the dirt work? And I'm like, absolutely. So he walks over to a table and he grabs a set of plans and he hands them to me. And he says, when can you have this bid to me? And I said, I'll be here in the first thing in the morning. He goes, well, you don't have to get it that fast, but, you know, this was going to solve a lot of anxiety for me.
Right.
And I said, no, I'll have it to you first thing in the morning. And he looked at me and he goes, when's the last time you had a paycheck? I said, man, it's been a while. He reaches down in the bottom drawer of his desk and he pulls out a 3-ring binder checkbook. And I'm not sure what he's doing. I mean, I know he's writing me a check. He writes out a check. He hands it to me, $5,000. And I said, the first draw that I get from you on this office complex, I will pay you this back. And he said, no. He said, you don't have to do that. He said, just pay it forward one day to somebody who's in your situation that needs help.
No kidding.
Which I did. I did 5 years later probably, but I did do that. The feeling of relief. It's funny when your body lets down and you feel relief. I mean, it just all came out in tears. I took that set of plans and that check for $5,000, and I went and sat in my truck in the parking lot of his office and cried. The opportunity that I had been putting a gazillion miles on my vehicle to try to find, I found.
Finally materialized.
I found it.
Yeah.
So I took those plans, and I went home, and I stayed up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with my ruler. I didn't have any of my computer software to do the takeoff on the drawings and figure out the cuts and fills. I had to do it with a ruler and a notepad and a pencil. And I sat there for hours and did it the old school way. Figured it out, called some of my vendors who would still talk to me and got pricing on material. Finished the bid, took a shower, ate breakfast, and drove back to his office. Now, I didn't sleep.
No sleep.
Hey, I didn't need to sleep that day.
You wanted it over with.
Yeah.
Or the new start anyhow.
Right. And so I drove back to his office, met him there that morning. I don't even know what time. And I walked in, sat down, did in my bid, which was handwritten. And it was like $285,000. I mean, it was a good deal. And he looks at the bid and he gets on his computer and he hits a few keys and he pulls something up and he's going, I thought, oh shit, I'm high. And I almost said, I can do it for less. I mean, I just want to get started.
Right.
Shit, I'll do it for free. let's just get started, right? Yeah. And he goes, wow, He goes, I have, I'm just going to pick a number because I don't remember exactly, but it was a lot more. He goes, I have $350,000 in my budget for dirt work. He goes, I'll pay you that. And he could have picked that money up and kept it. But he really, really helped me. And he goes, I'll pay you that. And I was overwhelmed, to say the least. He said, we start like 2 weeks from today. And I went outside. I called two of my guys that had been around for a while. They had both found other jobs. I explained the situation to them. Told them that we had a project that started in 2 weeks, but I needed them, if they wanted to come back to work for me, that I needed them to come and get this equipment going. So I told them I have $5,000 and this is what I'll pay you. And, I think we can weather this storm for 2 weeks. I've been doing it for 6 months. We can weather this storm for a few weeks, until we start getting payment on this project. Right. And they came. They both came. They gave notice. About a week later, they showed up. They brought their tools and all their stuff, and they got all that equipment running. And so a week later, during that time, I created D5 Enterprises with an attorney and put $5,000 in it. And so we started on March the 27th of 2007 as D5 Enterprises with 5 pieces of borrowed equipment and $5,000 to our name. And we just had our 18-year anniversary. And this year we will probably do in the neighborhood of $25 million in business.
It's like a bit more than $5,000.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
Wow. You had mentioned that you don't have to discuss anything you don't want to, but you said that you did manage to pay it forward a few years later.
I'm going to tell you the positive part of that story. The negative part I'm going to leave out.
Fair enough.
I paid it forward and it kind of came back around to bite me, but it doesn't matter. I honored my obligation to Joel, and I paid that money forward. A friend of mine, Wilbur Davis, whose family had been in the rebar business for years, before his dad passed, they sold the company to another company, and that company hired him as the COO, hired him back as, to run the business his dad had started. For whatever reason, which I'm not privy to, that relationship fell apart after 4 or 5 years. And they kicked him out on the street. He was well known around the city, and he was out trying to find opportunity. Went to every rebar company there was. Nobody would hire him. He tried to get a job. He just decided, well, then I'm just going to get out of this business, and went and tried to find work other places, like pharmaceutical sales. And, he was a smart guy and different things like that, and just none of it worked out. We were sitting in the Stoneworks restaurant at the Rim, and he was explaining to me how he had been beating his head against the wall trying to figure out what to do. And so what happened was Joel and I backed him in the rebar business. But that day when I met him for lunch, he's just crying. I'm not how I'm going to support my family. This has been so brutal, blah, blah, blah. And it just hit me that this is my opportunity to pay that forward. So I went out to my truck, got my handwritten checkbook, brought it back in, and I wrote him a check for $5,000. I said, here, this will get you by for a while, and I'll go talk to Joel, and we'll figure out what we want to do. And we backed him in the rebar business. Joel ended up having problems, so he kind of faded away into the sunset, left the funding of that company all on my back. It went slower than was expected because I wasn't planning on being the one that funded the whole thing. And that deal just didn't work out. So it didn't work, and that's all I really want to say about it.
But you honored your obligation.
I did.
So 18 years in now, and we're sitting at the Tesoro Escondido Ranch, your ranch.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is, and it's a beautiful property, And I can only imagine it's a dream come true for you. Was this part of the grand plan, or did it just kind of show up as an opportunity?
You know, like I said, when I originally went into the site work business, one of the reasons for picking that was because, you know, VK Knowlton and Sirizotti and all these big site work contractors, they all had ranches where they would take these general contractors. I don't remember many general contractors having ranches of their own, and you know, it was a lifelong dream to have something. I grew up hunting. Uh, I love hunting. I love being in South Texas. I love the ambiance of it. You know, it's just there's just something about it that has always drawn me here, and growing up in it, I'm sure had a lot to do with that. Uh, the memory of my dad, you know, he loved it here in this area of the world, and yeah, man, I didn't really see this coming. I knew I wanted it. Um, I never was sure I could afford it. And I can tell you, in those 18 years of business, there were hard times, as with any business. Uh, you know, half of our world wants everything to be equal and wants everybody to have the opportunity to own a company, right? Well, I can promise you that half our world is not prepared for what it takes to run a company.
Oh, yeah, I think you're absolutely.
They don't see that every day that I wake up, that everything that I own is that liability for all the trucks that I have running up and down the street and the machines that I have crawling all over job sites, just waiting for that one thing to happen that destroys it all. Um,
And you do have a little insight into that
yeah,
possibility.
yeah, I do. Um, so,
So everything is at stake every day when you go to work.
right, and so there were hard times. And like I said, people aren't prepared. They're not prepared for the stress of where's the next dollar going to come from. Laying in bed on Thursday, praying that, and you, this is very emotional because it's absolutely terrible to be laying in bed on Thursday night, praying that the guy that said he was going to pay you tomorrow is actually going to pay you tomorrow, because the however much 10, 20, $30,000 of payroll that needs to go out on that same day is contingent on you receiving that money.
Do you think that's a huge part of the difference in your ability to take this company and make a very large amount of money, and somebody who is more content with, I just know every 2 weeks I'm going to get a paycheck from my employer, so they don't want to step out of that and take those risks?
Absolutely. And you know what? Not everybody can be a risk taker, right? I've always been a risk taker. Anyone who knows me knows that, man, I'll lay it out there. You know, I will. And it scares the living crap out of most people. And it has scared me a few times. But the reward is always greater. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. It's really crazy. I've learned to reel that in as I've gotten older and more mature. But ask anyone who knows me, I'll take risks, and good Lord, I'll spend money. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, it's not for everyone. It is not for everyone. The stress of business ownership is off the rails, and I will promise you one thing: if someday in the future an administration makes it hard enough for us to do business, we all know it's coming. And we are all, I'm going to look at right in the camera, and we are all putting enough money away to survive the rest of our lives, because we're afraid that someone's going to come into office that's going to push doing business to to make it to where it's impossible.
To where you have to be a multinational corporation and that's it.
Well, that or, you know, every dollar that we make, we only get to keep 10 or 20% of.
It's headed there
because
fast.
we got to share it with everybody.
Right.
Well, to hell with that. None of those people have laid in bed and cried their eyes out hoping they were going to get money the next day to make payroll, you know? So, you know, that group can kiss my ass. And when they make it hard enough for us to do business, we're all going to quit. We're all going to quit. We're all going to take our money, and we're all going to go just hide on ranches like this one. And you'll never see or hear from us again. And you can just deal with your crap.
So this,
back to the ranch.
all this is a new business.
The ranch? No, look, businesses make money, right?
Right.
This is a hobby.
Okay.
This-
Okay. So
this
this is purely for the love of it, right?
Yeah, if this is a business, I'm failing miserably.
Okay.
There's a whole lot more going out than there is coming in.
So we'll amend that to the dream. This is your
Yeah.
dream.
Yeah, and it's been, this has also been a real ride. I mean, this started over a dinner with some friends. With one of the friends of mine being Damon Thorpe, is a ranch realtor. His wife and mine are really good friends. And we went to dinner with them, and I guess he was qualifying me, and I didn't even know it, asking me how business was going and, you know, different stuff. And I'm sure by what I told him about our success and things that, you know, we had done, and he looks me dead in the eye and he goes, "How come you haven't bought a ranch?" I said, "Because I don't believe that I can afford one." And I'll never forget it. He said, "Well, you might be surprised." And the minute he said that, I mean, the wheels started turning. And I said, "Okay, well, look, if you can find one that's 500 acres and $1 million to 1.5, knock yourself out." Then we started going and looking at ranches. And I thought, okay, I really thought it was an exercise in futility and that nothing was really going to become of it. So we started looking. I wanted to be close to my dad's ranch, between Batesville and La Pryor. We looked at a place in Batesville, 500 and something acres. It was terrible. My brother and I walked that whole ranch. We didn't find 1 ounce of deer sign on it. It was like it had been vacated by the animals for some reason. And we looked here in Big Wells off of 83, 85, and we just bounced all around. And I thought, yeah, it's just not going to happen. So he calls me one day and he goes, "Hey, there's a place that just came on the market. It's a 3,000 acre high fence ranch, and they're selling it off in tracts. But whoever gets there first, you know, as you come in, you get to say how much you want to buy. But a minimum 500 acres." I said, "Okay." He told me how much it was. I ran the numbers. I'm like, all right, look, it's a little more than I thought, but okay. I never even really thought about financing a ranch, so I asked him about that, and I said, who does this for self-employed people? I mean, that's the other thing. Everyone who goes to work, you know, for someone and gets a paycheck, and that's a static income, and they have a pretty much static tax return.
Everything's set, right?
That's easy to turn into somebody to see if you qualify for a loan. Well, for business owners, we want our taxes to be as small as possible. So, you know, we buy things and we put things in assets and we do this and we do that and we do everything we can to make that return as small as possible, right? and what we have to pay. So it can be tough for a self-employed person to get a loan. And he said, well, I'm sending you the contact of Laura Martinez with Capital Farm Credit. She lives in Bulverde. Call her and just have a discussion. Because before I wasted everyone's time driving all over the state anymore looking at ranches, I wanted to make sure that I was even able to buy one. And I called her and talked to her for a little while, and in about a 30-minute conversation, I walked away feeling fairly confident that, yeah, because, I said, well, I'm self-employed. She goes, Shane, 95% of the people that are buying ranches are self-employed. I said, well, that makes sense. She goes, we know how to deal with that. We know what to look for. We know what we're doing. I gave her some numbers off of a tax return and some financial statements, just some bottom line numbers, and she goes, I don't believe this is going to be a problem. You can go buy 500 acres for that amount. So, great. So we drive down here to look at this ranch. And it's so funny. We drive through the gate, and about 400 yards inside the gate, the road starts over a tank dam. There's water on the right, and a sheer, a drop off on the left, typical tank dam. We're driving across this tank dam, and this huge buck. This is in, put this place under contract in December of 21, and this huge buck runs up, I guess he was drinking water, runs up the bank, crosses the road right in front of us, and goes down the other side. And my wife's sitting in the back seat, and she goes, oh, shit. And my realtor, my buddy, Damon, looks at me and he goes, you do realize that's a realtor's dream, right?
I hired that.
And I'm like, yeah, and you can tell the guy who let that buck out of that cage that he can go home now. And we drove down this road. I mean, you can see it, and it goes almost all the way to the front. And the ranch was okay up front, very flat. I could tell that the brush was decent. Obviously, it had some good deer on it. I had just seen a huge one. As we're coming through here, we go around this area right here, and we get over here on top of this hill, and I can see that lake down there, and I was just mesmerized. It just felt like where I needed to be. So we drive around the ranch. We leave. We get away from the realtor who had it listed. We leaving to go back home, my wife and I and Damon. And he goes, well, what'd you think? And my wife says, you don't even need to ask him. She goes, I can tell you right now by his reactions that I saw as we were driving around that this here is a done deal. I said, well, it's only a done deal if you like it. And she's like, well, if you like it, I like it. And she's hunted a lot. She's hunted down here in South Texas a lot. She likes doing this stuff. Probably not as much as my boys and I, but, she likes it enough to come spend a lot of time here. And I really appreciate that.
That's a great opportunity.
And it makes it so much easier, when your wife enjoys it also. So we're going to go back and write up an offer, and I call Laura the next day, Martinez at Capital Farm Credit. I said, hey, we're going to write up a contract for 500 acres. She goes, okay. And we drew a line, which was this road right here. That pretty much
goes down that way.
Yep. That's pretty much 530 acres or something. And so I send her all my stuff, all my financial stuff, which with them is so minimal. It's the easiest loan I've ever gotten in my life. Probably one of the biggest purchases I've ever made, and it was the easiest process that I've ever experienced. It was incredible. I love that company. She gets my stuff and she calls me back. She goes, "Hey, you qualify for a lot more than 500 acres, just in case." Because, I'd explained to her my situation and how I was concerned and how I didn't know if I was going to qualify. And so, it was 500-acre minimums, and I was just going to do as close to that number as I could, because to me, that's just what I believed was all I was going to be able to do.
Right.
So she called me back. "You qualify for more than that." And I'm like, "Okay, let me have some discussions." So I go and talk to my wife, and whatever you want to do. And I call Damon. Of course, he's not excited about it at all, because, he is the
Yeah,
realtor,
sure.
right? And so Damon picks that line where that fence is. It's now a low fence.
Right.
Because one of the things about buying here was you had to high fence your property off. That was one of the restrictions. So there was already a seismic line that kind of went that way, and Damon could do it on his map. He said, "Shane, that's 800 acres almost on the nose." So, okay, wow, that's huge compared to what I wanted. It's almost double. So I called Laura, and I said, "It's 800 acres. This is the number. A few keyboard strokes I can hear. Click, 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 click. No problem." I'm like, "Oh, shit, great."
Thought you were going to say no.
Yeah, I'm like, "Okay." Then the surveyor, I'm real funny about this stuff. Then the surveyor calls me, and he's down here surveying out the piece. And he says, "What do you want this to be?" He goes, "Acreage-wise." I said, "I want it 800 acres on the nose. 800.00. No problem." Sets a survey stake, and then he goes down here, and literally off of that seismic line, we down here at the end, we had to move over like 20 feet to make it 800 acres on the nose. So fast forward, we closed on February the 10th of 2022 on this original 800 acres where our camp is and that big lake.
That first road, which we can see the top of it there.
Correct.
As it crests the hill.
Correct.
So from there going
to the
toward
north
your
fence
line, that was the original
500.
plan.
Yeah.
Then
It was like 533, and then going from there to this seismic line where the fence
that
is
bumped you
now,
up to 800.
that would bump me up to 800 on the nose.
Okay. From there, so you're done. You have this portion of the ranch. And did you start doing all of these improvements at that point?
Yes, we went out, found this double wide, added all these porches to it, had a friend come down and build that barn, immediately started figuring out what we needed to do to preserve our deer herd and make it better for that summer. We were in the middle of a horrible drought that first summer. But I have a little tidbit to add to this, which is kind of funny. So for 20 years before this purchase, I have leased ranches all over the state. Most of them south of Highway 90, some of them a little north. I used to have a lease on the San Pedro Ranch, which is a very famous ranch. It's next door to the Faith Ranch. And then also next door to the Indio Faith. So point being, I'd been leasing. My family and I leased that ranch for 8 years with Bobby Cavender, the car guy, the dealership guy. And we spent 8 years, 5 months out of the year for 8 years in a row there together. And in which that time we became really good friends. Not putting a plug in for Cavender Auto, but I am. He's a really good guy. A really good guy. So I had leased forever. And so we fast forward and we buy this place and I start spending time down here. It took me a year before it sank in that this actually belonged to me and that it wasn't another deer lease.
this was your place to design, and
it just seemed so surreal to me that I just couldn't get my head wrapped around it, that I actually owned it. And there are days when I come down here that I never drive through that gate, that I'm just not so very thankful that all the pain and strife and grief and all the BS that, and obviously some I created for myself and some I didn't, that I had been through, led me to this. I don't take it for granted, not for 1 second. So we closed on the first 800 in February of 22. In November of 22, right after deer season started, I get a call from my realtor, and he had been called by the listing agent. He said, "Hey, sales have been slow. No one else has bought." Actually, one other guy bought. The guy up front bought 875 acres. So I owned 800 in the back. He owned 875 up front, and there's a big chunk in between. My agent calls me and said, "Hey, the listing agent called me and said that they really want to try to get this thing moving, and they're willing to offer us a deal. They'll sell you whatever else you want for X number of dollars an acre." So, and Laura Martinez, I blame you for this. So I call Laura Martinez at Capital Farm Credit. I mean, it's only been 6 months since we closed. She already has all my stuff. I said, "Hey, Laura, they're offering me to buy more for this price," which was substantially less than the original price. And I said, "If I wanted to buy 500 more acres, what do you think?" Click, 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 click. "That's not going to be a problem." And I said,
I thought you were going to say no again.
"Great." So December the 15th of 2022, we bought 500 more acres.
Wow. And that was
From that fence to the next fence.
Okay.
And I'd already built a high fence because I had to. That was part of my deal. Within 90 days of purchasing the property, you had to put up a high fence to fence off your area. So I'd already built that high fence. Well, now I just bought another 500 acres on the other side of it. And now I got to put up a new high fence because that's a restriction. So we bought that, and then January of 23, I built a new high fence. But I want the deer to be able to roam the whole thing. My guys come in and they cut the original high fence in half and create a 1,300 acre ranch. And so then we closed on that in December of 22. So there was 600 acres now between my ranch and Jacob West from Houston, the guy up front. When I bought the 500, he added another 200 and something to his. So he had 1,100. I had 1,300. There was 600 in between us. I made an offer. I made a real lowball offer to the guy to buy the remaining 600. He didn't take it. And about 2 months later, a rancher out of Cotulla came in and bought it on I think it's a 1071 exchange. It's a tax benefit real estate deal. And he bought that 600 acres, which I'm not sure he ever really wanted. And it just sat there. He leased it 1 year to a guy. The problem with that 600 acres is it had no deer on it. Because before I put up my last high fence and before Jacob put up his high fence, we fed the hell out of our properties to try to attract the deer, and it worked. I'm going to tell you there were probably 20 deer on that 600 acres.
And then it went to,
Well, no, 20 total after it.
wow.
Yeah. There should have been 60 or more probably, and there were like 20. So a guy named Charlie out of Cotulla bought that. He leased it that first deer season. The guy wasn't happy. There weren't any deer on it. Another cattle guy came in, ran some cattle on it for a few months, pulled them off. And it was just sitting there, and, you know, business had been going real well, and different things had been happening. And so my biggest fear was that someone was going to come in and buy that 600 acres. That wasn't going to have the same ethics and morals and that Jacob and I had, and, you know, the same respect for your neighbor, and, you know, not have to worry about him doing weird stuff like, I don't know, shooting deer on the other side of the fence. And, you know, because all of that has happened. And I also realized for what the guy wanted for the property, you know, I've improved my 1,300 acres. And it's, you know, it's gone up in value 1,000 or more an acre because of the improvements and the deer herd and the things that we've done. I also realized that the minute I bought that 600 acres and added it to my ranch, that its value was what the rest of my ranch was per acre. So you could add another 1,000 an acre to that 600 acres. The minute I bought it, I was going to have 600,000 more equity in my ranch. Once I finally figured it out, and there's good reason to buy it, I started making phone calls, and I called Laura.
And she did it to you again?
I said, "Hey, Laura, the last 600 acres," she kind of chuckled. I said, "Well, you know, I needed to do this in pieces to make myself feel better." She said, "Well, it's been a while. Send me your stuff." I sent her some financials, personal financial statement and all that. She called me back a couple days later, and she goes, "Yeah, no problem." She goes, "In fact, I'm going to work this deal so that we use the equity in the original ranch as the down payment on the new one, so you can actually come in and buy this with no money down," which was good because I'd already put a ton of money into this part.
Right.
So that was actually good news. That's not normally something that I would do, but in this scenario, I wanted to snag that 600 acres any way I could, and that was one way to do it. So in August of 23, we bought the remaining 600 acres. So now we have 1,900 acres at the end of a journey that started out with maybe wanting to be able to buy 500. And I'll tell you, the bigger it gets, the more stuff there is to do.
Non-stop, right?
Yeah, it's nonstop because you know, the minute you get something accomplished, something else breaks or happens, or something that you did 6 months ago is needing attention again. I mean, the mowing and the road repair and driving around and making sure, you know, illegals haven't cut your fences, and you know, just all kinds of things that constantly happen. And I will say that I've been very fortunate. One of the hardest things for guys like me who buy ranches 3 hours from home is the security of it, and finding somebody that you can trust to take care of it. Most of them are part-time guys. They do it on the side. Or you hire somebody local that you have no clue who they are,
Right.
if you can really trust them, but, you know, you can't do it, so you have to have somebody to do it. Well, I was fortunate enough to have a friend, John Vella, who loves working down here. I was also fortunate enough that his career has always mostly been in the oil field. So his wife and his family was already used to him being gone during the week, and sometimes weeks at a time. So it's worked out real well. You know, John Vella is our ranch foreman. He works really hard. He loves what he does, and so I'm super blessed to be
That's
able to have
absolutely
that person.
apparent.
Yeah.
That he loves this job.
Oh, he does. He loves it like no one else I've ever seen. He doesn't even view this as work. I don't think he loves coming down here, and by God, boy, that guy works hard. You know, my brother too. My brother Brandon loves it down here. He's helped me immensely. When my dad passed away, he and my sister got the ranch in between Batesville and La Pryor and kept it for quite a while. He was an outfitter there, sold hunts. They eventually sold the ranch. And, I wanted him to have the opportunity to come and, be a part of this because he loves it much as I do. And like I said, he's been super, super helpful down here to me. So, I've been lucky. And of course, recently, I've had the pleasure of pretty much bringing a guy here who is well known throughout South Texas, has been the subject of many articles, has been in a lot of books about South Texas ranching and hunting. Daniel Boone from Carrizo Springs, who grew up on the San Pedro Ranch. His dad was the ranch manager of the San Pedro. And then eventually Daniel became the ranch manager of the San Pedro after he worked at some other ranches early in his career when his dad was still there. But when his dad retired, he became the ranch foreman at the San Pedro. So I've known Daniel for 30 years, but he's here now helping John and consulting with us on this place. I really feel like I've got the absolute number one ranch manager, cattle guy, deer guy, that you could have. He's taught me over the years. He's taught me so much.
He's an absolute wealth of knowledge. Just to hear him talk about anything.
Yeah, and it's funny. He wants to come down here and work, and I keep trying to talk him out of it. And his dear wife Chrissy is a hell of a cook, and she helps around here keeping the house and the cabin and things, in tip-top shape, and it shows. It shows. You don't have to blow the dust off of anything or pull the cobwebs out of a corner here.
No, not at all.
Not at all. It's
absolutely.
It's put together. It's clean. So yeah, and I didn't have to try very hard to put all this together. It all just kind of fell into place, and that's just kind of how I am. If you have to force something or work too hard at it, it just wasn't meant to be.
Maybe it's not what you should be doing.
Yeah. When it all just falls into place, then it's the right thing, and you're on the right path.
Yes, sir. This is absolutely a dream come true, and it's great to have an opportunity to come out here and do this. Is there anything else that you want to go over?
No, not really. I'm just really blessed. My family loves this place. My boys love it. My daughter's pretty busy. She doesn't really get to spend much time here. I love my family. I'm thankful that I get to provide this for them. Over the next few years, God willing, my goal is to get this place paid for, so they don't have to have that burden if something were to happen to me.
Right.
My dad, about 30 days before he was killed on his ranch, was in our office, and I was a little overwhelmed running that company. He was at the ranch. He would come to San Antonio every couple of weeks and give me the hardcore going over, asking tons of questions. He'd been doing this a long time. He knew exactly all the questions to ask. He knew everything I wouldn't have an answer for, apparently. But he never asked me all the stuff that I knew. So I never got credit for that. But man, he could really pick the ones I had no clue. And he walks in one day and he goes, "Hey," we had our own mechanics, and there was a front end loader in the shop. And the whole top of the engine had been taken off, and he comes in, he goes, what's wrong with that loader? I didn't have any clue. I was so overwhelmed with running that company that I didn't know. I said, I don't know. And he goes, come here. So he takes me out in the shop, and he just rakes me over the coals. Can't run this business without knowing every single thing that goes on in it. If this machine is broke, you need to know why. You need to know what's being done to get it repaired. You need to know how fast it's going to go back out in the field. You need to know this stuff. And I'd been working so hard, managing all these schools that we were building and all this stuff that was going on. He could just see the disappointment and just the letdown in my face. You know, I was just overwhelmed and I was upset. And he stopped. He recognized what was going on, and he stopped and he said, look, I know it's not fair to you that I dumped this company on you when Frank left. And I know that you work hard, and I know that you've been doing a good job. He said, and you've given me the opportunity to spend my time on my ranch without having to come up here and babysit you. And I'm sorry if when I come in here every couple of weeks, you get this condensed version of everything that I want to talk to you about and tell you about, and I know it doesn't come out right. He said, but look, Shane, you don't have to worry. I'm not going to be here forever.
Almost like he knew, right?
Almost like he knew. And 30 days later, he was gone.
That's eerie. Eerie to think how accurate his prediction was.
Well, I hope somebody gets some good out of this and it just doesn't bore everyone to tears.
Well, absolutely not. And I want to take the opportunity to thank you, one, for letting me come out here, because this is a dream come true for me. Ever since I've been in Texas, I've been wanting to come out and do some of this, and it's been a great opportunity. But even more than that, the opportunity to sit and visit with you and hear your story and let you share your story. So I'd like to do it again if you have an opportunity.
Sure.
I know there's plenty more to talk about.
Sure, absolutely. I enjoy having you here because I know how much you appreciate it. I know how much you like doing it. So, you know, it makes me feel good. You and your wife are great friends. You know, that's the other thing that I love about this place, is that I get to extend this opportunity to people who don't have it on a regular basis. You know, that's part of me not taking it for granted, is being able to share it.
And we're very grateful for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you again.
Sure. Absolutely.
Thank you again.
All right, babe.
Let's go shoot at something.
Yeah?
Oh, very good. Nothing recorded. No, I'm kidding.